In today's clip, I'm going to share with you my top 5 reasons as to why one should incorporate real estate in any type of fire journey. I'll state my assumptions and break down a variety of reasons, both material and psychological, as to why the answer is yes. Heyo, Zenpuck here. Another day not working for the man. Alright, so today's topic is about real estate and its place in anyone's fire journey, right? So, my answer I'm already putting out there is yes, you absolutely do need real estate if you want to be financially independent in any type of way, okay? But first, we gotta have some assumptions, right? Several assumptions. One, you can afford the 20% down payment at the very least. I'd suggest more like 30%. Because you don't want to pay that PMI, which is what you have to pay, an insurance on top of your mortgage, an HOA, and real estate taxes. If you pay less than 20%, that's just a waste of money. Don't do that. Two, assumption. You have some sort of liquidity after your housing purchase has been made, okay? Do not put all of your money in a single real estate basket. That is ridiculous, okay? And three, that your dream, when you hit fire, isn't simply to move overseas immediately, presumably for cost of living purposes, right? Like nomads who want to go to like Indonesia or Estonia or something. I'm assuming you're not one of those people. And finally, we are generally referring to real estate as your first real estate purchase, okay? Because if you have more than one real estate purchase, then you're already sold on the idea of real estate as part of fire to begin with, or just in general, part of your investment portfolio. Okay, all right. Now let's get into the top 5 reasons as to why one needs real estate. Okay. Reason number 1, everyone has to have a place to live. It's a pretty simple one, right? When you think about what are the alternatives, and there's renting. We'll get to why I think renting is not sufficient, okay, in subsequent reasons. But there's also, the whole van life phenomenon, which honestly I admire very much, okay, because those guys I think it's amazing what they can do. But the thing with van life or any kind of living in a car type of situation is that it's just not sustainable, okay? And you're not really ever going to be efficient. If you think that, a studio apartment is small, just imagine living in a van. It's you basically have to cut down everyday items to the minimum, right? Like you can't even buy like a 12-pack of toilet paper. Imagining having to buy a single roll of toilet paper constantly. That's just it's ridiculous. Okay. Plus, honestly, I'm not enamored with the idea of having to take out my own poo. Okay, I bet you're not either. So you need a place to live. Okay, that's the simplest of all reasons. And we are also creatures of habit, most of us. Okay? I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions and some people who could be perfectly fine, going from one place to the next within a time frame of months rather than years. But most of us having a home base is just a thing that we're used to. Okay. Reason number 2. This is a really easy reason, which is leverage, right? What does real estate have that the stock market doesn't have, generally speaking? Which is that you're incentivized to use leverage so that your purchasing power is multiplied, right, by the loan that banks will be able to give you. Again, with any kind of leverage, there are risks, right? But real estate is really the government-approved version, where you get favorable tax treatment and the interest rate is relatively low in this year of 2020. So if you're in the position, you should take advantage of it, right? Certainly for your own primary residence, right? It gets a little bit more complicated if we're talking about like you want to grow a real estate empire, but there are other places like BiggerPockets that you could go and read up on if you want to, go into like a pure real estate portfolio. I'm just talking about you do still need your primary residence, and having leverage helps you to be able to purchase more house for the amount of capital that you actually have. Okay. Reason number 3. Real estate is actually a really easy hedge against the stock market. Okay, if you have any sort of portfolio in the stock market, you understand when I say, hey, that sucker oscillates a lot, right? Real estate does too, but not to the same extent. And generally, depending on where you live, it doesn't move exactly in lockstep with the stock market because it's usually hyper local to your local market. So, in a way, I look at it as it's a hedge against stocks in the same way that people used to think bonds are a hedge against stocks. And really, real estate is the only alternative to bonds right now, okay? So if you look at the bond market, it's either very risky bonds or any relatively safe bonds have terrible returns because of the government-mandated low interest rate. Now, what does low interest rate result in? It results in favorable terms for real estate because you can get loans at a lower rate, and it results in unfavorable terms for bonds because those are directly related. So because of the low interest rate environment that we're in, I'd argue right now, I mean, not forever, right? But right now, real estate is a much better hedge against the stock market than bonds would be, okay? Reason number 4, this is really a counter rebuttal against one of the key features that people think is a detriment, but I think can be a plus, right? Instead of a minus, it's a plus, which is the relatively illiquidity level of real estate, right? Which means that, hey, like, you can't just sell it within the week like you could with stocks, right? It takes time. I think this might be a plus because even though it's not as liquid as the equities market, it prevents you really from making any rash decisions that human beings are prone to do, right? Like compared to the stock market, if it crashes one day, people will tend to go sell, right? Because they're following the herd. With housing, let's say the housing crashes 20% or whatever within the course of a month, you might be tempted to sell as well, right? But the fact that it takes you probably a month or two to sell it gives you lots of time to really calm down and reflect on what your reasoning is. Like, do you need the money or are you just following the herd, right? And another rebuttal to the illiquidity argument is, like, people say, hey, like, if you buy your primary residence, what if you move, right? What if your job changes and you have to move? That's a real concern, right? Because it's not super easy to get rid of real estate, and you don't want to be pressured into selling, okay? What I would suggest is that in the modern age, if you bought a primary residence in a certain state, say on the East Coast, and you need to move, to the West Coast or something, and this is what happened to me, all I did is turn that into a rental property, okay? Because if I picked that real estate property to live in, surely if I'm okay with it, there's plenty of other people that would be okay with it as well, okay? So in this day and age with technology, with, smartphones and the ease of communication, it shouldn't be that hard to simply find a manager if that's what you're doing. Because if you're moving for work, this rental property simply becomes a supplemental source of income, right? Not your primary source of income. And number 5, this is the, I would call a psychological reason, right? Which is that having control of your primary residence gives you a sense of mental freedom. And it's especially so in the long term once you actually pay off the house, right? Think about this. If it's something that you've paid for years, possibly more than a decade, right? Most, home loans are either 15 years or 30 years. I mean, I'd suggest if you're trying to go for FIRE, then you should pay off your house before, you actually exit the workplace, right? But still, this is probably one of the longest payment plans you've ever been on in your life. And unlike a temporary raise, once you pay off your housing payment, that is a moment of happiness that I personally will remember really for the rest of my life, because it's just commiserate with the level of effort that you put in. And don't forget, I think we also put a lot of importance on tangible assets. Remember that for people on the FIRE journey, is usually an argument between stocks versus real estate. And I will say one of the positives about real estate is, like, it's your house. You can touch it, right? It's a little different than looking at numbers on a screen. And I'd argue this kind of psychological achievement, personally, I've never had that feeling, that sustained feeling for a elongated period of time on my gains in the stock market, because any gain could be wiped out the next day, right? But real estate, that's very, very unlikely. Once you paid off the mortgage, you will always have that house, and that's really an amazing feeling. Thanks, guys. Check out some of my other videos on the links above. Have a good day.